Welcome to Extraterrestrial Reality. I recently read about another incident involving a giant UFO. We hear about these stories every now and then. Of course, there's the most famous one probably has to be the 1997 Phoenix Lights story, where like 1,000 people in Arizona saw a gigantic triangular or V-shaped craft hovering throughout the skies silently. And of course, this happens all the time. And of course, there's that famous case from 1987 or 1986 rather, involving Japan Airlines cargo flight 1628, where there was an aircraft that was en route from Paris to Narita International Airport near Tokyo, where the crew basically saw several UFOs, including one gigantic what the pilot described as a mothership, basically flying along with them. And here was another incredible story, and it was mentioned recently during a podcast, the Chris Lato podcast. He had a guest on, a guy named Bob McGwier. Chris Lato, of course, does a lot of videos on YouTube with regard to UFOs. In fact, if you're probably aware of it, if you're listening to my podcast, and I'm sure you're probably aware of Chris Lato's videos on YouTube. But I'll leave the link for his YouTube video where this is discussed. There was a guy named Bob McGwier. Apparently, this guy did some classified work on some Navy vessels throughout the years, and he was talking about a couple of different incidents during that interview. One of them involved he was on a submarine, and there was a unidentified submerged object that they encountered. But I'm not going to talk about that. I want to talk about this. This is a gigantic object that appeared over a ship, over a Navy carrier, in 2008. And here's an article about this incident that appeared last week in the Daily Star out of the UK. And the headline reads, "Glowing UFO towered over U.S. Navy ship in Typhoon and was so big it stopped rain. Bob McGwier was on board the USS Blue Ridge during a typhoon in 2008 when a gigantic glowing craft allegedly appeared overhead. It was so big that it protected the entire ship from rain." Wow, that sounds crazy, doesn't it? Anyway, let's read the article here. It says, "A United States Navy aircraft carrier was shrouded by a mysterious craft during a typhoon that was so big it stopped rain hitting the ship," one person on board has sensationally claimed. Bob McGwier, who claims to have worked on classified projects on board several vessels, previously revealed the chilling encounter while on a nuclear submarine. Well, that's the nuclear submarine story. That's something for a different day. Anyway, continuing, it says, "But that wasn't the only bizarre time he has witnessed unidentified objects. Speaking to Chris Lato on his YouTube channel, Bob recalled a huge shape hovering over the USS Blue Ridge in 2008. He explained, "While we were going from Thailand to Vladivostok during port calls in 2008, we went through a typhoon, and the typhoon had 90-knot winds and 40 to 50-foot seas. I was on the bridge and noticed that even though we were in a typhoon and it was raining like mad, there was no rain hitting the ship. I looked out the window and looked up and could see a glow above us in the sky. It wasn't very bright, but I could see it. Whatever it was blocking off the rain from the entire ship from stem to stern." Bob described the lights as yellowish and appeared to be on a flat surface. As he continued watching, the object suddenly grew brighter before taking off straight up. As soon as it did, the rain returned. The logical inference is that it was a gigantic craft that took off," he concluded. And then I'm not going to read the rest of the article. I just wanted to read that little segment there and then talk about it. Now, sometimes this kind of thing seems to happen where these gigantic craft just seem to show up, and they seem to, for the most part over the years, a lot of times they show up near military installations, over ships. You hear stories about this kind of stuff. These gigantic, incredibly gigantic craft that, like some people in Phoenix, when they saw that Phoenix Lights craft, some people said it was so big you could have landed you know, you could have landed several giant planes on the thing. It was so big. I mean, it was actually the governor at the time, Fife Symington, he said that was the biggest thing he ever saw in his life. So sometimes these things show up, and this one was so big. Imagine it was basically serving as an umbrella over the ship. I mean, it was stopping rain from hitting the ship during a typhoon. And you have to wonder, I mean, this is what I wonder, like when these things show up, now in this case, particularly, it's a giant Navy carrier, okay? And all of a sudden there's this gigantic craft. I mean, this ain't your regular, flying saucer, this ain't the sport model type flying saucer that Bob Lazar talks about. This is something that's so big, it just defies logic. It's you can't even imagine it. And a lot of them, these things are usually running silently. There's no sound. Like, what kind of technology is capable of doing something like that? Well, it's technology that we don't have and nobody else in this world has. And that's, one of the reasons why governments of the world don't want to talk about this. They don't want to acknowledge the extraterrestrial reality, because then they have to talk about these kind of things. And a lot of times there's a lot of people that see these things and they're told, hey, we can't talk about this kind of stuff. I mean, a lot of pilots over the years, just commercial jet on commercial jet airliners, they're basically, they don't want to talk about it because they're afraid of losing their jobs. That's the kind of stuff that happens. But, I have to wonder, why would something like this show up over a Navy carrier? And, I read that article and I was thinking, and I looked at the video too, and of course I'll have links for both of them in the description. But, I'm wondering, what's the reason for that? I mean, is it, the first thing that comes to mind, a lot of times it's like, well, maybe they're just, it's an investigation. They're basically, it's an intel mission, basically. They're trying to see what we got or something like that. That could be one way of looking at this. Another way of looking at this, though, could be like them saying something like, hey, we got our eyes on you and we're watching you. You better be careful. That could be one of the things. I mean, I've recently been talking a lot about, what I think that aerial school incident, what the message was behind that. Of course, I'll just give a brief overview of that. In 1994, September of 1994, at this aerial school, this elementary school in Zimbabwe, Africa, a bunch of kids at 10:30 in the morning were on recess, and all of a sudden a flying saucer shows up, lands. Extraterrestrial beings exit the craft, and one of the beings starts communicating telepathically with some of the little kids, and they're sending messages into the kids' brains. There were several kids that had said that they were being communicated with telepathically, and the messages were showing them destruction and chaos, and that we're destroying the world. And I'm starting to think that was a warning, basically a warning to the rest of the world to not use nuclear weapons, right? And of course, there's been, beyond that, I mean, there's been how many incidents throughout the years? Other stories have we heard, with flying saucers showing up over nuclear missile silos, like in the United States and other countries. In Russia, there was a case too. And basically, in the one case in the United States in 1967 in Montana, I believe, it was basically they turned off all the missiles, basically shut everything down. The flying saucer showed up, all of a sudden everything, goes down. And then in a different case that happened in Russia at some later date, apparently the missiles in the silo were all turned on, ready for action. To me, that seems like there might be a message here. And the message is, again, this is all speculation, and I don't know if this is true or not, but the message could be is that, well, if any of you countries decide to use nuclear weapons against each other, well, you're going to have big problems. And I think one of the problems that we're going to have possibly is that these aliens are going to show their face at that point. Like if for instance, right now, Russia is threatening the Ukraine with nuclear weapons, and you have a madman basically in charge in Russia. And if this thing keeps escalating, and at some point he decides to launch a nuclear bomb and it goes off somewhere in Ukraine, that could spell the end of humans basically being in charge of themselves. I believe that that's a possibility, that basically these aliens are looking at this planet and the way we behave, and they're concerned. I think maybe it's not just them either. It could be a whole bunch of different alien races out there, a whole bunch of different ones that are concerned that if we keep developing if we keep advancing technologically and we don't get control of ourselves and we don't stop killing ourselves, and in fact, if we take it too far and decide to start dropping nuclear bombs on ourselves, well, maybe we're just not fit to take care of ourselves anymore, and maybe they're going to either obliterate us or take over the planet. That could be what's going on here. And maybe when these things show up over that Navy ship in 2008, stopping basically during a typhoon and stopping the rain, maybe it's just, hey, it's the aliens saying something like, hey, boy, now look we know you're tough and everything, but guess what? We're tougher out there, and just keep that in mind. Maybe that's what they're saying. We'll take over this whole damn planet. We'll kick you right out of here. Maybe that's what the message is. Okay, they show up like that. Yeah, we have this big, impressive Navy carrier out there floating. And next thing you know, these aliens are. They always seem to show up at a lot of military installations. They always seem to be buzzing around our fighter jets, and there's all these different stories, right? And the military doesn't like to talk about it. They don't want to tell anybody about this. And really, the reason is because the military-industrial complex is just about power, money. It's all that kind of stuff. Really, that's the bottom line. The military-industrial complex exists for war. They want war. But I think that these visitors are looking at us, possibly, again, this is pure speculation on my behalf, but I'm trying to figure, we none of us really have an answer of what's going on here, right? But when you look at the big picture of it all, when you consider what's going on here, you have cattle mutilations. In fact, that's still ongoing. I mean, recently I talked about in a different podcast that there's cattle mutilations ongoing. In fact, there was a whole bunch of cattle mutilations that just occurred in the past few months in Colorado. In fact, I was watching a Linda Moulton Howe recent video, and she said, I don't know where, she's saying that they were bloodless, that all these cattle are bloodless. There's no signs of any predator. There's no answers. They don't have any answers of how this is happening. In the article that I was talking about in a recent podcast with regard to those cattle mutilations, it didn't give any information on the condition of those animals. It just said that they don't have any answers, basically. Now, Linda Moulton Howe is saying now that they're all bloodless. So just like the recognizable end result of potential alien cattle mutilations is apparently prevalent in these recent cases in Colorado, according to her. So, and I suspect that the reason, one of the possible reasons, and I a lot of us think this actually, is that maybe they're draining the blood from these cows because they live off blood. These aliens are apparently insects, advanced insects, and they live off blood. So that's their food source, possibly. And that's the reason for that. So that's still going on. That shows that they're still up to this mutilating cattle, right? So they're still here. They're up to something. They seem to be very interested in what we're doing, right? And then you have the alien hybridization program ongoing, and I think that that's a method of basically creating these beings that look like humans, but they're actually aliens. And at some point, if we humans decide to take things too far, somehow they'll be triggered into going into action, and somehow maybe these aliens somehow take over the world. It sounds insane, but you have to wonder if they're here and these things are happening. You have to wonder what the purpose is behind it all. And of course, a lot of us know that they are here. Of course, a lot of us have had experiences or sightings, and I've seen one of these beings, so I know that it's real. I've seen one of the craft. I know that it's real, and a lot of other people have known it's real. And plus, there's a lot of information out there to show that they're real. So you have to wonder, when you put all of this stuff together and you start thinking about it, why would they show up over a Navy vessel and stop the rain? Was it just intel gathering? What's the purpose for that? How many times over the decades have they done things like this? You would think at this point they would have enough data on us and our technology. But, and so that makes me wonder, maybe there's a different purpose. Maybe the purpose is that they're sending, that's part of a message too. It's like, hey, we're watching you. You better look out. Don't go too far, or guess what? You're in trouble. We're taking over. It's just a theory. But hey, we don't get any answers from our government. They the United States government, for instance, has for years now been lying about this. They're still not they still haven't come clean. And I don't know if they ever will. I don't think they ever will, unless something happens that's beyond their control. That's how I feel right now. I believe that it's going to take something beyond our control, beyond their control, and they're going to have to admit to it. That's how I see it. But then again, there are other people who believe maybe that we are very close to disclosure. I hope I'm wrong, and I hope they're right. I guess we'll see.